Ever wonder how one family held Europe in its iron grip for centuries? Forget dynasties built on brutal conquest alone. The Habsburgs. They mastered the ultimate power, most strategic marriage. Picture this. A family so dominant, their reach stretched from the sun-drenched plains of Spain to the icy peaks of the Austrian Alps, from bustling German cities to the sprawling territories of Hungary. Their emperors were not just rulers. They were chess players on a grand scale, weaving a web of alliances and power that left rivals gasping. But behind the crowns and the castles, these were real people. They loved, they lost, they schemed, they fought. Some were brilliant, some were bizarre, some unified vast empires. Others watched them crumble. Get ready to dive into the scandalous, the surprising, and the utterly epic lives of the 7 most powerful Habsburg emperors who shaped the very map of Europe. Their stories are wilder than any soap opera you have ever seen. Number 7. Joseph II, the reluctant revolutionary. The year 1741 brought a new, stern, and deeply earnest soul into the world. Joseph II. He was the eldest son of Maria Theresa, one of Europe's most powerful empresses, and her husband, Francis I Stephen. Growing up in the magnificent Schönbrunn Palace in Vienna, Joseph's childhood was far from ordinary. His mother, a woman of immense will and intellect, doted on her children but also pushed them relentlessly. Joseph, from a young age, showed a fierce dedication to learning, often preferring books and serious discussion to the playful pursuits of his many siblings. He was known to be intensely serious, almost rigid, even as a young man. His tutors reported a brilliant mind, but also a stubborn streak and a burning desire to improve the world around him. He devoured the writings of Enlightenment, philosophers like Voltaire and Rousseau, filling his mind with ideas of reason, progress, and the rights of man. These ideas, radical for their time, would shape his entire reign. Joseph's relationship with his mother, the formidable Maria Theresa, was complicated. He admired her strength and devotion to duty, but he also chafed under her authority. She had guided the empire through the tumultuous War of the Austrian Succession and cemented the Habsburgs' position. Joseph, however, believed she was too slow, too traditional, too cautious. He wanted to rip up the old ways and build a new rational society. When he became co-regent with her in 1765, following the death of his father, the true friction began. He was eager to implement sweeping changes, while she, wiser from decades of experience, preached patience and prudence. It was a constant battle of wills, a quiet but intense struggle for control over the direction of the empire. He would push for reforms. She would often veto them or delay them. This period, marked by his frustration and her steady hand, was a crucial apprenticeship, though one filled with internal conflict. Joseph experienced profound personal tragedy early in his life. His first marriage to Isabella of Parma was a love match rare for royal unions. Joseph was utterly devoted to his beautiful and intelligent wife. Letters from the time reveal a tender, almost vulnerable side to the usually reserved prince. Isabella, however, was melancholic and died tragically young from smallpox in 1763, leaving Joseph heartbroken and with one surviving daughter, who would also die young. This loss plunged him into a deep grief from which he arguably never fully recovered. His second marriage to Maria Josepha of Bavaria was a political arrangement and proved to be loveless. She was not Isabella, and Joseph treated her with cold indifference, often ignoring her. This marriage also ended in tragedy when she, too, succumbed to smallpox just 2 years later. These personal losses, particularly Isabella's death, are said to have hardened Joseph, making him even more determined to dedicate himself solely to his duties to the point of austerity. He had no surviving children, a deeply concerning fact for a monarch and a source of constant anxiety for his mother. When Maria Theresa finally passed away in 1780, Joseph became sole Holy Roman Emperor. The chains were off. He wasted no time. He was convinced he knew what was best for his people, and he was determined to enact his vision, often with little regard for tradition or public opinion. He saw himself as an enlightened despot, a servant of the state working tirelessly for the good of his subjects, even if they did not understand it at the time. His reforms came thick and fast, a whirlwind of change that shocked the old order. One of his most famous actions was the abolition of serfdom across his hereditary lands in 1781. Peasants, who had been tied to the land and subjected to the whims of their landlords for centuries, were suddenly granted personal freedom, the right to marry, move, and pursue trades without permission. This was a truly revolutionary act, designed to unleash the potential of the common people. Joseph also tackled the deeply entrenched power of the Catholic Church. A devout Catholic himself, he believed the Church held too much wealth and influence, diverting resources from the state and hindering progress. He issued the Edict of Toleration in 1781, granting Protestants, Orthodox Christians, and Jews unprecedented freedom of worship and civil rights. This was a monumental step towards religious equality in a continent still scarred by religious war. He dissolved hundreds of unproductive monasteries, seizing their lands and wealth to fund his reforms and hospitals. Monks and nuns were ordered to engage in useful work like teaching or nursing. This earned him the title the Sacristan Emperor from the Pope, who traveled to Vienna in a desperate but ultimately futile attempt to dissuade him. Joseph was respectful but unyielding. His reforms extended to every aspect of society. He modernized the legal system, ending many forms of torture and aiming for a more uniform justice across his diverse territories. He established public hospitals and orphanages, believing that the state had a responsibility for the welfare of its citizens. He tried to standardize education, requiring elementary schools in every parish. He even attempted to simplify bureaucracy, streamline tax collection, and reform the military. His personal life reflected his dedication. He lived simply, often wearing a plain uniform, and famously traveled incognito among his people, listening to their grievances and observing their lives firsthand. These Kaiser Joseph travels became legendary, a stark contrast to the distant majesty of most monarchs. He wanted to understand, to see, to fix. Despite his noble intentions, Joseph's rapid-fire reforms met with widespread resistance. The nobility resented the loss of their feudal rights and influence. The church was outraged by the seizure of its property and the new religious freedoms. Even the peasants whom he sought to uplift were sometimes confused and overwhelmed by the sudden changes, or suspicious of a government that had always oppressed them. In Hungary, his attempts to centralize power and impose German as the official language sparked fierce nationalist opposition. In the Austrian Netherlands, modern-day Belgium, his reforms led to open revolt, as local traditions and privileges were swept aside. He was a reformer who moved too fast, too far ahead of his time, often alienating the very people he aimed to help. He believed in top-down change, a rational imposition of progress, and he lacked the patience or political skill to build consensus. As his reign progressed, Joseph found himself increasingly isolated and disillusioned. His ambitious foreign policy, including a costly and ultimately unsuccessful war against the Ottoman Empire alongside Russia, further drained the treasury, and his popularity, his health always delicate, began to fail under the immense pressure and stress he suffered from lung problems and chronic illness. On his deathbed in 1790, a mere 10 years after becoming sole emperor, he was a broken man, convinced he had failed. He requested that his epitaph read, "Here lies Joseph II, who failed in everything he undertook." While this was a harsh self-assessment, it reflected his profound disappointment that his grand vision for a reformed, enlightened empire had not been fully realized. His revolutionary actions, however, had left an undeniable mark, setting in motion forces that would continue to reshape Europe long after his death. His life was a testament to the power of ideas and the tragic difficulty of imposing radical change on a deeply traditional world. Number 6. Charles VI, the heir hunter. Charles VI, born in 1685, came into the world as the second son of the long-reigning Emperor Leopold I. For most of his youth, Charles lived in the shadow of his older, more outgoing brother, Joseph I, who was destined for the imperial throne. Charles was a quieter, more studious young man, trained for a potential career in the church. Destiny, however, had a different path in mind. When the Spanish Habsburg line faced extinction, Charles, as the remaining Habsburg male, found himself at the heart of a continental power struggle that would define his early life, the War of the Spanish Succession. At the tender age of 18 in 1703, Charles was proclaimed King of Spain in Vienna, a bold move that ignited the conflict. He then sailed to Spain, determined to claim his throne, a land where his ancestors had reigned for centuries. For over a decade he fought tirelessly, often leading his own troops in battle against the formidable armies of France and its chosen Spanish candidate, Philip V. He learned the harsh realities of warfare firsthand, enduring sieges, campaigns, and the crushing weight of command. Records show that Charles, despite his lack of military experience, displayed considerable courage and perseverance during these long years. He spoke Spanish fluently, having been partially raised with Spanish customs which endeared him to some factions in Spain, particularly in Aragon and Catalonia. He genuinely believed he was the rightful heir, and this conviction fueled his fight. Then, a sudden shocking turn of events changed everything. In 1711, his elder brother, Emperor Joseph I, unexpectedly died of smallpox. This devastating news meant that Charles was now the sole surviving male. Habsburg, the very powers that had supported his claim to the Spanish throne, now grew wary. A union of the vast Spanish Empire with the Habsburg hereditary lands and the Holy Roman Empire under one ruler, Charles, would create an empire even larger than Charles V's. A terrifying prospect for the balance of power in Europe. This shift led to the eventual peace treaties of Utrecht and Rysstad in 1713 and 1714. Charles was forced to give up his claim to the Spanish throne, a bitter pill to swallow after so many years of fighting. However, he was compensated with the valuable Spanish Netherlands, Naples, Milan, and Sardinia, which significantly expanded Habsburg territories in Europe. He returned to Vienna, now emperor, no longer the King of Spain, but the master of a renewed Austrian empire. Once settled in Vienna, Charles's greatest personal and political obsession became clear. Securing the succession for his own line, his marriage to Elizabeth Christine of Brunswick-Wolfenbüttel had produced no surviving sons. His two male children died in infancy, a devastating blow that haunted him. He already had two daughters, Maria Theresa and Maria Anna. But Habsburg tradition, like most European monarchies, favored male heirs above all else. This was not just about family pride. It was about the survival of his dynasty and the unity of his vast, diverse lands. Without a male heir, the Habsburg territories, painstakingly accumulated over centuries, could be torn apart by rival claimants. From this deep personal anxiety, the Pragmatic Sanction was born. This legal document, issued in 1713 even before his brother's death, declared that all Habsburg lands would be inherited by the eldest child, regardless of gender, and that these lands were indivisible. This was a truly revolutionary concept. For the time, challenging centuries of male preference. Succession. Charles dedicated the rest of his reign, nearly 3 decades, to getting every major European power to recognize and guarantee this document. He spent untold sums of money, made countless political concessions, and engaged in a relentless diplomatic dance across the continent. He exchanged territories, promised alliances, and offered favorable trade deals, all to secure signatures. On the Pragmatic Sanction, ambassadors and envoys crisscrossed Europe, carrying the emperor's pleas and promises. It was a tiring, frustrating, and ultimately expensive endeavor. He sacrificed short-term gains for this long-term goal, driven by a profound sense of duty and a desperate hope for his family's future. Despite his constant political anxieties, Charles was a devoted patron of the arts and sciences. His reign saw a blossoming of Baroque culture in Vienna. The Spanish riding school, with its magnificent Lipizzaner horses, was built during his time, suiting the elegance and skill of the Habsburg court. The vast imperial library, now the Austrian National Library, was expanded with magnificent halls, filled with books and manuscripts, reflecting Charles's own love of learning and collecting. Musicians, artists, and architects flocked to Vienna, transforming the city into a dazzling cultural capital. He also had a personal passion for hunting and was known to enjoy theatrical performances. As the years passed, Charles grew increasingly frail, his health likely impacted by the constant strain of his diplomatic efforts. He had secured the signatures. He believed his daughter Maria Theresa's future was safe, but appearances could be deceiving. Many of the European powers who had signed the Pragmatic Sanction did so with private reservations, waiting for the opportune moment to challenge it. They saw the lack of a male heir as a weakness, an opportunity to chip away at the formidable Habsburg inheritance. Charles VI died suddenly in 1740, reportedly after a meal of mushrooms that caused him severe indigestion. His death, after dedicating his life to ensuring a smooth succession, immediately triggered a catastrophic war. Europe erupted into the War of the Austrian Succession, proving that even the most meticulously crafted legal documents could not overcome the ambitions of powerful neighbors when a perceived weakness. The immense irony of his life's work being immediately tested by force of arms must have been a bitter thought if he had known his daughter, Maria Theresa, would have to fight for every inch of her inheritance, proving her own strength in the face of the very chaos her father had so desperately tried to prevent. Charles VI's reign was a testament to the personal obsession of a ruler with his dynasty's future, a future he secured on paper only for his daughter to have to secure it with blood and fire. Number 5. Leopold I. The Turtle Emperor. Leopold, the first born in 1640, was not originally destined for the imperial throne. As the second son of Emperor Ferdinand III, his path was set for a life in the church, complete with extensive theological education. He was known for being quiet, serious, and deeply pious, a stark contrast to his more outgoing elder brother, Ferdinand IV. Fate, however, intervened dramatically. In 1654, Ferdinand IV died unexpectedly, followed by his father, the emperor. In 1657, suddenly, the devout, scholarly Leopold found himself the heir to the Habsburg lands and the Holy Roman Empire, a seismic shift from the quiet life he had envisioned. At just 17 years old, he ascended to a position of immense power, burdened by the expectations of a war-weary empire, still recovering from the devastation of the 30 Years' War. Leopold's early reign, with a baptism by fire. The French monarch, Louis XIV, the Sun King, was aggressively expanding his territories, constantly challenging Habsburg influence. In the East, the Ottoman Empire, a centuries-old foe, remained a formidable and unpredictable threat, constantly probing Europe's defenses. Leopold, despite his quiet demeanor, proved to be an incredibly resilient and patient ruler. He was often criticized for his slowness and indecision, earning him the nickname, the Turtle Emperor. Yet, like a turtle, he possessed immense perseverance, endurance, and an unwavering commitment to his dynasty and his Catholic faith. He understood the long game. Even if his immediate actions sometimes appeared cautious, the greatest challenge of Leopold's reign came from the Ottoman Empire. In 1683, the Ottoman Grand Vizier, Kara Mustafa Pasha, launched a massive invasion, marching directly towards Vienna. It was one of the largest sieges in European history. With a vast Ottoman army surrounding the city walls, Leopold, after initial hesitation and a desperate plea for help, made the agonizing decision to evacuate the imperial court from Vienna, leaving the city's defense to his brave commander Ernst Rüdiger von Starhemberg. Records from the time describe a city under immense pressure, suffering from bombardment. and the threat of starvation, the fate of Central Europe hung in the balance. The siege lasted for 2 agonizing months. Just when Vienna was on the verge of collapse, a relief army hastily assembled from various German princes and commanded by the Polish king, Jan III Sobieski, arrived on September 12, 1683, in a dramatic and decisive battle on the Kahlenberg Hills overlooking Vienna. The Christian forces routed the Ottoman army. It was a turning point. This victory, fueled by desperate courage and strategic brilliance, lifted the siege and marked the beginning of the end of Ottoman expansion into Europe. Leopold, who had returned to a triumphant Vienna, was now ready to push back. Following the relief of Vienna, Leopold seized the momentum. He launched a series of counter-offensives that became known as the Great Turkish War. This long, arduous conflict lasting until 1699 saw the Habsburg armies, bolstered by brilliant commanders like Prince Eugene of Savoy, systematically reclaim vast territories previously held by the Ottomans, especially in Hungary. Battles like Mohacs in 1687 and Zenta in 1697 were crushing defeats for the Ottomans, cementing Habsburg control over Hungary and parts of the Balkans. It was a monumental achievement, dramatically expanding the Habsburg domain and transforming Austria into a major European power. The empire, once constantly looking over its shoulder at the Turkish threat, now stood as a bulwark against it. In his personal life, Leopold was deeply religious and intellectual. He was a keen musician and composer, often writing his own operas and oratorios, finding solace and expression in music even amidst the chaos of war. He married 3 times his first 2 wives, Margaret Teresa of Spain and Claudia Felicitas of Tyrol, dying young, leaving him with few surviving children. His 3rd marriage to Eleanor Magdalene of Pfalz-Neuburg, a pious and intelligent woman, was a success and produced 10 children, including his eventual successors, Joseph I and Charles VI. Despite the many tragedies and challenges, Leopold maintained a quiet dignity and a profound sense of duty. His deep piety and reliance on Jesuit advisors were constant features of his character. He believed in divine providence and saw himself as God's instrument in defending Catholicism in Europe. Leopold's reign, though often overshadowed by the grandeur of Louis XIV's court, was one of immense importance for the Habsburgs. He not only survived relentless external pressures from France and the Ottomans, but expanded his empire significantly. He consolidated the power of the Habsburg monarchy in its hereditary lands, and laid the groundwork for Austria's rise as a great power in the 18th century. He initiated a period of rebuilding and cultural flourishing, especially in Vienna. When he died in 1705, after a reign of 48 years, he left behind a significantly stronger, more secure, and more influential Habsburg empire than the one he had inherited, a testament to his quiet but unyielding perseverance. He truly was the stubborn survivor, enduring and ultimately triumphing over adversity. Number 4. Ferdinand II, the unyielding crusader. Born in 1578, Ferdinand II was steeped in strict Catholic orthodoxy. From his earliest days, his parents, deeply devout, entrusted his education to the Jesuits, the fiercely dedicated soldiers of the Counter-Reformation. At the Jesuit College in Graz, and later at the University of Ingolstadt, Ferdinand absorbed their teachings, developing an unshakable faith and an intense hatred for Protestantism. He saw it not just as a theological error, but as a corrosive force, threatening the very soul of Europe. This early indoctrination forged his character, a man of unwavering conviction, iron will, and a singular focus on restoring Catholic supremacy. When he became ruler of Inner Austria in 1590 and later Archduke of Austria, he wasted no time in implementing his religious zeal. He launched a vigorous counter-reformation in his territories, driving out Protestant pastors and teachers, closing Protestant churches, and enforcing conformity. Protestants were given a stark choice: convert or emigrate. His strict measures were successful in turning his lands Catholic again, but they also sent a clear message to the diverse Holy Roman Empire. a message of uncompromising religious intolerance. This hardened stance made him a hero to some Catholics and a terrifying figure to Protestants. The year 1619 proved to be a pivotal moment. Ferdinand was elected Holy Roman Emperor, but his ascent was not without massive conflict. As King of Bohemia, a land with a large Protestant population and a tradition of religious freedom, his absolutist Catholic policies immediately sparked outrage. The Defenestration of Prague in 1618, where Protestant nobles threw two of his Catholic regents out of a window, was a direct act of defiance against his rule and a shocking signal of rebellion. This audacious act ignited a firestorm across Europe, marking the beginning of the 30 Years' War, one of the most brutal and destructive conflicts in history. Ferdinand, far from seeking compromise, saw this as an opportunity to crush Protestantism once and for all, and assert imperial authority throughout the Holy Roman Empire. Ferdinand's war effort was initially successful. He secured powerful allies, especially Maximilian I of Bavaria, and the Catholic League. He employed brilliant, ruthless generals, like Albrecht von Wallenstein, who built a massive, privately funded army that swept across Protestant territories. The imperial forces won a decisive victory at the Battle of White Mountain in 1620, crushing the Bohemian revolt. Ferdinand then embarked on a severe crackdown, executing leaders, confiscating vast estates, and re-Catholicizing Bohemia. With brutal efficiency, many Protestant noble families fled, their lands seized and given to loyal Catholic aristocrats and generals, dramatically changing the social and religious landscape of the kingdom. This was no mere political maneuver, it was a crusade. In 1629, riding high on his victories, Ferdinand issued the Edict of Restitution, a decree designed to restore to the Catholic Church all lands secularized by Protestants. This was an incredibly provocative act, stripping Protestant princes and cities of vast wealth and power. It was meant to solidify Catholic gains, but instead pushed moderate Protestants into the arms of radical ones, and drew new powerful foreign interventions into the conflict, particularly from Sweden under King Gustavus Adolphus, followed by Catholic France, despite its religious allows, followed by Catholic dominance. The war, which Ferdinand had hoped to end quickly with Catholic triumph, now escalated into a continent-wide struggle. Despite his rigid faith, Ferdinand was not immune to personal struggles. His first marriage to Maria Anna of Bavaria was a strong partnership, and she bore him many children, including his successor Ferdinand III. Her death in 1616 was a blow. His second marriage to Eleanor of Mantua was also a loving one, and she shared his deep piety. Throughout the war, Ferdinand remained steadfast in his convictions. He spent hours in prayer, fasted regularly, and firmly believed that God was on his side. This profound faith gave him an unshakable resolve in the face of immense pressure and mounting casualties. He was often criticized for his stubbornness, his inability to compromise, and his refusal to see the devastating human cost of his policies. As the war dragged on, the tide began to turn against him. The Swedish and then French interventions shifted the balance of power. Wallenstein, his most powerful general, became too ambitious and independent for Ferdinand's liking. In 1634, fearing Wallenstein's potential betrayal, Ferdinand authorized his assassination, a chilling act that underscored the emperor's ruthlessness when his authority was challenged. Despite the mounting losses, the widespread destruction, and the financial ruin of the empire, Ferdinand never wavered in his fundamental goal. He continued to fight, convinced that his cause was righteous. Ferdinand II died in 1637, still locked in the brutal grip of the 30 Years' War. He had poured vast resources and unimaginable human suffering into his vision of a reunited Catholic Holy Roman Empire. While he had failed to crush Protestantism entirely, he had undeniably strengthened Catholic power in the hereditary Habsburg lands and solidified the imperial office, albeit at a terrible cost to the German lands. His reign stands as a stark testament to the immense power of religious conviction in shaping political destiny and the devastating consequences when such conviction becomes an unyielding, uncompromising force. He was the unyielding crusader, and his life story is intertwined with the bloodiest chapter in European history. Number 3. Ferdinand I, the pragmatic peacemaker. Ferdinand I, born in 1503, found himself in an unusual position from birth. He was the younger brother of Charles V, the most powerful man in Europe. While Charles was raised in the cosmopolitan courts of Burgundy and Spain, groomed for a global empire, Ferdinand spent much of his youth in Spain, learning its language and culture. He was a quieter, more pragmatic personality than his dynamic elder brother. This difference in upbringing and temperament would define their complex relationship and the very future of the Habsburg dynasty. In 1521, Charles V made a decision that profoundly shaped Ferdinand's life and the course of European history. He divided the vast Habsburg inheritance. Charles kept the Spanish crown, its Italian possessions, and the burgeoning empire in the Americas. To Ferdinand, he granted the Austrian hereditary lands. It was a calculated move, meant to ease the burden of governing such a sprawling dominion, but it also created two distinct branches of the Habsburg family, the Spanish and the Austrian. From that point on, Ferdinand's destiny was to build and secure the Habsburg presence in Central Europe. His marriage to Anna of Bohemia and Hungary in 1521 was a masterstroke of dynastic policy. Through this union and the tragic death of Anna's brother, King Louis II, at the Battle of Mohacs in 1526, fighting the Ottomans, Ferdinand inherited the crowns of Bohemia and Hungary, vastly expanding the Habsburg-Tevers Central European kingdom. Ferdinand's new domains immediately plunged him into two monumental challenges: the relentless advance of the Ottoman Empire and the explosive spread of the Protestant Reformation. In 1529, the Ottomans, under the formidable Suleiman the Magnificent, laid siege to Vienna. It was a terrifying moment for Europe, the city standing as the last bastion against an invading force that threatened to sweep into the heart of the continent. Ferdinand, despite being outnumbered, rallied his forces, and through a combination of desperate defense, strategic genius, and the harsh realities of campaigning in autumn, the Ottomans were forced to retreat. This victory cemented Ferdinand's image as a defender of Christendom and secured Vienna's status as a key imperial city. The Ottoman threat, however, remained a constant draining challenge throughout his reign, forcing him to divert significant resources and attention to his eastern borders. Simultaneously, the Holy Roman Empire was tearing itself apart over religion. Martin Luther's 95 Theses had ignited a spiritual revolution that blossomed into widespread political and social upheaval. Ferdinand, a staunch Catholic, deeply lamented the religious division. Unlike his brother Charles, who often sought a definitive military victory against Protestantism, Ferdinand understood the deep roots of the movement and the impossibility of crushing it entirely through force. He participated in numerous religious colloquies, attempting to bridge the gap between Catholics and Protestants through dialogue, though these efforts ultimately failed. His pragmatic approach led to the Peace of Augsburg in 1555. This landmark treaty, largely negotiated by Ferdinand, formally recognized Lutheranism as a legitimate religion within the Holy Roman Empire. Its core principle was cuius regio, a religio, whose realm, his religion. This meant that each prince could choose the religion of his territory, and his subjects were expected to follow suit or face immigration. It was a reluctant compromise, a formal acceptance of religious division, but it brought a desperately needed, albeit fragile, peace to the empire. After decades of conflict, Ferdinand's role in this treaty highlighted his willingness to put political stability above absolute religious unity, a stark contrast to the more uncompromising stance of his brother and his own latest successors. Ferdinand was known for his diligence, his attention to detail, and his intellectual curiosity. He was a patron of the arts and sciences, and his court in Vienna became a center of learning. He was deeply devoted to his wife Anna, who bore him 15 children. This large family was crucial for dynastic security, providing numerous marriage alliances and ensuring the continuation of the Habsburg line. Unlike his globe-trotting brother, Ferdinand preferred to govern from Vienna, establishing a more centralized administration for his Austrian, Bohemian, and Hungarian lands. He laid the bureaucratic foundations for the later powerful Austrian monarchy. When Charles V made the astonishing decision to abdicate in 1556, he formally transferred the imperial title to Ferdinand. This was a complex and drawn-out process, and not without some tension, as Charles initially wanted to secure the imperial title for his own son, Philip II of Spain. However, Ferdinand's steady hand and long experience in the empire made him the obvious and necessary choice. He finally became Holy Roman Emperor in 1558. Ferdinand I died in 1564, leaving behind a vastly expanded and more stable Habsburg domain in Central Europe. He had successfully defended Vienna, navigated the treacherous waters of the Reformation, and secured the crowns of Bohemia and Hungary. He established the Austrian Habsburgs as a distinct and powerful branch of the dynasty, ensuring their survival and setting them on a course to become one of Europe's leading powers for centuries to come. He was not as flamboyant as his brother, nor as rigidly ideological as his grandson, Ferdinand II. Instead, he was a shrewd, patient, and ultimately effective ruler, a true pragmatic peacemaker who held his diverse empire together during one of its most turbulent periods. Number 2. Charles V, the burdened king of the world. Born in Ghent in 1500, Charles V was a child of destiny, born into an inheritance so vast it seemed almost mythical. He was the grandson of 4 powerful monarchs, Ferdinand and Isabella of Spain, who had funded Christopher Columbus, and Maximilian I of Habsburg, and Mary of Burgundy. This meant he was born heir to an empire that stretched from the sun-drenched plains of Spain to the icy peaks of the Austrian Alps, from bustling German cities to the bustling ports of the Netherlands, and across the vast, newly discovered lands of the Americas. He spoke French, Flemish, Spanish, and German, a living embodiment of his diverse inheritance. From a young age, he was burdened with the immense responsibility of this unimaginable power. His accession to the Holy Roman Imperial throne was no simple inheritance. When his grandfather Maximilian I died in 1519, Charles faced stiff competition from the dashing Francis I of France and the ambitious Henry VIII of England. It was a furious, expensive race, largely won through a combination of strategic alliances, massive loans from powerful banking families like the Fuggers, and sheer political maneuvering. In 1519, Charles was elected Holy Roman Emperor, now officially Charles V, a title that made him theoretically the most powerful temporal ruler in Christendom, a true king of the world. The sheer scale of his empire meant that Charles spent his entire life on the move, a traveling monarch shuttling between his disparate territories, attempting to hold them together. Records show he made over 40 journeys, including 9 trips to Germany, 6 to Spain, 7 to Italy, 4 to France, and 2 to England. Not counting his constant trips within the Low Countries. He suffered chronically from gout, a painful joint disease which often left him hobbling or carried in a litter. His reign was a relentless series of challenges, each one immense enough to define a lesser monarch's entire rule. First, there was a constant rivalry with France. Francis I, his lifelong nemesis, saw Charles's power as a direct threat to French dominance. The Italian wars between them raged for decades, a brutal cycle of battles, sieges, and shifting alliances. At one point, Charles even challenged Francis to a duel, an extraordinary offer between 2 monarchs. Then there was the existential threat from the Ottoman Empire. Under the brilliant Suleiman the Magnificent, the Ottomans pushed deep into Europe, laying siege to Vienna in 1529. Charles, seeing himself as the defender of Christian Europe, mobilized his forces, though he was not personally present at the 1529 siege. He later led expeditions against Ottoman strongholds in North Africa. This was a constant draining struggle on its eastern and southern borders. Perhaps the most significant challenge, and one that tore at his very soul, was the Protestant Reformation. In 1517, Martin Luther nailed his 95 Theses to a church door, sparking a movement that shattered the religious unity of Western Europe. Charles, a devout Catholic, saw it as his sacred duty to defend the church and suppress heresy. At the Diet of Worms in 1521, he famously declared that he would stake his kingdoms, my friends, my body, my blood, my life, and my soul, on upholding the Catholic faith against Luther's defiance. He battled the Protestant princes of Germany in the Schmalkaldic War, winning a decisive victory at Mühlberg in 1547. Yet, despite his military successes, he could not extinguish the flames of the Reformation, which continued to spread like wildfire. His empire in the Americas, though a source of immense wealth from gold and silver, brought its own set of challenges, managing vast new territories, dealing with the ethics of conquest, and establishing a colonial administration across an ocean. This was a new frontier of power, fraught with moral and practical dilemmas. In his personal life, Charles was devoted to his wife Isabella of Portugal. Their marriage was a love match, and her death in 1539, after only 13 years of marriage, plunged him into a profound and lasting grief. He never remarried, wearing black for the rest of his life as a sign of mourning. He was a solitary man, often described as serious and melancholic, finding solace in music, hunting, and his deep religious faith. He famously said, "I speak Spanish to God, Italian to women, French to men, and German to my horse," reflecting the linguistic and cultural tapestry of his life. The sheer burden of governing such a vast, rebellious, and constantly warring empire eventually broke him. After nearly 40 years of relentless effort, ceaseless travel, and constant conflict, Charles V made the astonishing decision to abdicate. In a series of emotional ceremonies in 1555 and 1556, he formally relinquished his crowns, dividing his empire between his brother Ferdinand I, who received the Austrian lands, and the Holy Roman Empire, and his son Philip II, who received Spain, its overseas empire. This was an unprecedented act for a reigning emperor, a ruler at the height of his nominal power. Charles then retired to the monastery of Yuste in Spain, seeking peace and solitude. Even there, he continued to follow political events, offering advice and receiving visitors. He spent his final 2 years in quiet contemplation, surrounded by clocks, a lifelong fascination, religious artifacts, and his beloved books, struggling with his persistent gout. He died in 1558, exhausted by the weight of a world empire that had been both his greatest triumph and his greatest burden. Charles V's life was an epic tale of power, duty, and the crushing demands of ruling an empire upon which the sun truly never set. Number 1, Maximilian I, the last knight and the master of marriage. Born in 1459, Maximilian I was a man caught between two worlds. He was the last knight, a chivalrous figure who excelled at jousting and hunting, embodying the ideals of medieval heroism. Yet he was also a shrewd politician and a forward-thinking military strategist who laid the groundwork for the modern Habsburg Empire through cunning marriage alliances rather than just brute force. His father, Emperor Frederick III, was a slow, cautious man, a stark contrast to his dynamic and ambitious son. Maximilian, from a young age, showed a zest for life, an adventurous spirit, and a charm that captivated those around him. Maximilian's first great stroke of genius, or rather luck, came with his marriage in 1477 to Mary of Burgundy. Burgundy was one of the wealthiest and most culturally sophisticated regions in Europe, encompassing parts of modern-day France, Belgium, and the Netherlands. This marriage was a colossal win for the Habsburgs, instantly elevating their status from powerful German princes to major European players. It was a true love match, a rarity in royal unions, and Mary was intelligent and popular. But their happiness was tragically short-lived. In 1482, Mary died in a riding accident, leaving Maximilian devastated and with two young children, Philip the Handsome and Margaret. The death of Mary triggered a desperate struggle as France, ever eager to expand, tried to seize her Burgundian inheritance. Maximilian fought fiercely to defend his children's rights, eventually securing most of the Burgundian lands, the losing part of Burgundy itself to France. This early challenge honed his political instincts and solidified his determination to protect his family's future. Maximilian, now a widower, then conceived a brilliant, almost audacious strategy that would define the Habsburg dynasty for centuries: the double wedding. In 1496, he orchestrated a political coup. His son, Philip the Handsome, was married to Joanna of Castile, daughter of the powerful Spanish monarchs Ferdinand and Isabella. In turn, Maximilian's daughter, Margaret of Austria, was married to John, the heir to the Spanish throne. This intricate web of marriages was a calculated risk. It aimed to unite the Habsburgs with the two most powerful kingdoms on the Iberian Peninsula, Castile and Aragon. The unexpected deaths of John and other potential heirs meant that Joanna eventually became the heiress to the vast Spanish domains. The child of Philip and Joanna, born in 1500, would be Charles V, who would inherit an empire of unimaginable scale. This carefully planned dynastic strategy, rather than conquest, was Maximilian's enduring legacy. Beyond his marriage strategy, Maximilian was a man of diverse talents and interests. He was a military reformer, recognizing the decline of the knightly charge and embracing modern artillery and professional infantry. He sought to create a more effective standing army for the Holy Roman Empire, though he often struggled with the empire's decentralized nature and the reluctance of its princes to contribute financially. He had a deep love for the arts, commissioning elaborate works that glorified his reign in the chivalric past. He cultivated his image as the last knight through autobiographical works like Viskönig and Theurdank, which recounted his adventures, often embellished for dramatic effect. He was charming, eloquent, and known for his personal courage, but also for his impulsive nature and chronic lack of funds, often finding himself deeply in debt. Maximilian's efforts to reform the Holy Roman Empire met with mixed success. He established institutions like the Imperial Chamber Court and the Imperial Diet, aiming to create a more unified and effective central government. However, the powerful German princes often resisted his attempts to centralize power and taxation. He constantly grappled with the challenges of ruling a vast, loosely structured empire, while simultaneously engaging in wars with France and other rivals. He was a restless ruler, always on the move, always planning, always seeking to expand Habsburg influence. His personal life, while marked by the early loss of Mary of Burgundy, later saw a less successful second marriage to Bianca, Maria Sforza of Milan, which was largely political, and produced no children. He was known to have several illegitimate children, indicating a lively personal life despite his public image. His passion for the hunt and his skills with a lance were legendary. He was a monarch who genuinely enjoyed the physical challenges and spectacles of chivalry, even as he pioneered modern statecraft. Maximilian I died in 1519, just as his grandson Charles V was poised to inherit the colossal empire he had so meticulously assembled through strategic alliances. He never saw the full realization of his dynastic dreams, but his foresight and ambition laid the very foundation for the Habsburg dominance that would shape Europe for the next 2 centuries. He was the great architect of Habsburg power, the master of marriage, and truly, the first of the powerful emperors who would leave an indelible mark on the history of Europe.